Hello, Bill.
Hello, Matt. How are you today in the DMZ?
I'm doing well. It's a wet, moist day here in the DMZ, but doing well. Good to talk to you.
It's a snow day in the northern DMZ, which means both children are home. So if you hear the sounds of Candyland in the background, that's why.
In my case, I'm at my office, but it would be you would hear "Call Me Maybe" or Friday or Curious George. Those are my sons.
Now, is that if you were home or in the Daily Caller offices?
Well, in the case of Call Me Maybe or Friday, a year ago, it could have been here, but my son's a little bit slow in the pop culture. So,
well, I got something to plug today because this morning the New Republic posted my second. I've now had two pieces in the New Republic on their website about guns. And you and I had some online exchanges. My first one regarding the wisdom of Obama pursuing Walmart as an ally to split the gun lobby, which we don't know if that's going to come to fruition yet. But my piece today, in advance of Obama's official announcement of what his specific proposal will be, was to emphasize that even though it looks like he's going to propose an assault weapons ban and reintroduction of that as part of the package, there is some indications that he's not going to go to the mat on that, and I'm saying that's fine. He doesn't need the assault weapons ban to make this a good package and to save lives. All of that's what a lot of the discussion is around, a lot of the emotion is around. I don't know if everyone's going to... People might be very prone to accusing him of caving in again if it comes to withdrawing that provision to get to the Republican House. And there's an inverse relationship of the potential effectiveness of that ban and the political difficulty of that ban. There's actually a lot of other things that might be less controversial but might be more effective. So I'm trying to shine a light on what we know, what transpired in the 10 years that we had a ban, and what other ideas are out there.
Well, Bill, I think you're right. There was no... First of all, the Clinton gun ban did not work. In fact...
I wouldn't go quite that far, but continue.
Well, in fact, the Bushmaster became popular during that time because it complied. It was not illegal during the Clinton gun ban. And other gun makers like Glock actually profited tremendously off of this ban for a variety of reasons. And I've written about that as well. But, Bill, I think you're right politically. And it's not just the Republican House. If you look at the Republican seats that are up, the Democratic seats that are up in the U.S. Senate in 2014, we're talking Alaska, Alabama, North Carolina, South Dakota, West Virginia. Rockefeller just retired, maybe partially because of this. I think there's a lot of reasons. Louisiana, I don't know if it said Louisiana. So there are a lot of red state Democrats in the U.S. Senate up for re-election. And I think the last thing they want is to have a contentious fight over the gun issue, especially when they remember how last time around, the Clinton gun ban, it really hurt them politically. Remember in 2006, you had Democrats taking the House partially because they recruited these blue dog Democrats like Heath Schuler to win some of these tough districts. And so I think that politically speaking, the so-called assault weapon ban or returning to that ban is not only ineffective but politically untenable. Now, I think that the NRA is doing a horrible job of public relations right now. The press conference they held was a joke. They put out some video game that seems to be in poor taste. They have a video out talking about President Obama's daughters, which seems to be perhaps not effective, perhaps even a backlash against that. And if the NRA keeps, quote, shooting itself in the foot, and if Obama were to find a way to partner with someone like Walmart, a big business that would profit ostensibly from closing the gun show loophole, forcing universal background checks, and also has red state bona fides, as opposed to, say, Michael Bloomberg, then I think it's possible that they could get something, some, quote, common sense gun control pushed through. Those are the things that would have to happen. I think you're exactly right that the assault weapons ban would be left on the cutting room floor.
All right, and you know, where you might part way slightly, I mean, there's a lot of evidence of how the previous ban, even to call it a ban, is generous because it wasn't a blanket ban on all assault weapons.
It banned guns that look scary, basically.
Well, I mean, there's several flaws with it. One, I mean, the whole notion of an assault weapon is kind of a made-up term. There's no clear delineation what is assault and what is non-assault.
Right.
So they had to make up these definitions, and they were easy definitions for gun manufacturers to work around. So you had a lot of things like Bushmasters that technically weren't in violation of it, but still effectively were the same thing. That's part of the issue. Part was you have a grandfather clause issue. That was one of the compromises that they made. So anything that was manufactured before the ban was still legal. So Glock ramped up their production of high-capacity magazines, which
not only that, Bill. Not only that, and I think you probably know this too. Not only did they do that, but the most ballsy thing they did was talk police departments into into upgrading their Glocks and trading them in, giving them the old guns back, which were grandfathered in, which they could then resell on the used gun market. And by the way, the prices, they could sell them at a higher price because prices were inflated due to the ban. So it's unbelievable what they did.
So you have an issue here where, you know, the main researcher on this subject, Chris Coper, at the end of the 10-year period said, look, it's inconclusive whether this was working or was going to work because, in part, the grandfather clause meant the implementation of this was as slow as molasses. You have all of this technically banned stuff legally still in circulation, gradually being phased out very, very slowly. That's part of the problem.
But Bill, that was part of my point. I wrote a piece at The Week a few weeks ago, look, there are 300 million guns in circulation right now, and I think the only way that you could, I'm against gun control on principle, but if you really wanted to get serious about it, you have to do confiscation. I mean, what are you going to do with the 300 million guns? I mean, I know people have bandied about the idea of making ammunition illegal or something, but I mean, you know, it just, I don't know. It strikes me as a this would you could do broader bans with buybacks. You're not just taking something away. You could have compensation for it. So you're not violating. None of the stuff that could or would pass would, in my opinion,
it might be impossible to pass. I agree with the political difficulty of it all.
What about these? What about these executive orders, though? I mean, we're in a dangerous time right now in the sense that you and I are talking before Obama actually holds a press conference today. What time is that, by the way? Do you know?
I think it's. I thought it was closing 11:45.
So we're like right on the cusp of this. So, I mean, my understanding is he can't do much in the way of executive orders. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, just to further the point that I was making in the New Republic piece. We don't really know what works and what doesn't. We have huge uncertainty of what's effective or what's not. I think there are aspects of the ban, the old ban, which were porous and made it hard for it to potentially work. But there is some evidence that some aspects were working. For example, the ban on high-capacity magazines, there was a Washington Post investigation that said by 2004, which is the end of the law, so the grandfather clause at its weakest relevant point, you've had more time to cycle out the old circulation. The cops in Virginia found far fewer, of about half, of the high-capacity magazines at crime scenes in 2004 than they're finding in 2010. So that's some evidence that, hey, this was actually beginning to take these things out of circulation. There's the fact that, on one hand, the rate of mass shootings has not changed at all in the period during the ban or before the ban or after the ban, but the casualty rate has gone up in recent years. So perhaps there was some impact as far as the amount of carnage being done. But that's sketchy. You can't call that definitive. So there's other ideas out there that are untested that Obama's expected to propose, like universal background checks. and some of these executive order things are going to tighten up the databases and the reporting. And if they bring back the high capacity magazine ban, which again there was some evidence that was working, those are all things that actually apply to a far broader class of guns than this manufactured definition of assault weapons, which, even though it was manufactured, involved very, very few guns that are involved in actual crimes.
Well, and also taking it to the next level, Bill, I think those things would be more palatable. I think an assault weapons ban, for possibly because of the history of it, is less politically feasible. There would be more of a backlash. But I think you might be able to get more Americans basically saying, okay, well, I think that you should have to. I don't want registration, but I think if you buy a gun, you should have to have this background check to make sure you don't have mental health issues. And so, we have to find a way, whether it's, if an individual wants to buy a gun, you got to go down to the gun store and register, not register, but and perform the background check to purchase from an individual. You can't just give somebody a gun. This of course, creates all sorts of political issues. But I think it might be more palatable for one reason or another than the assault weapons ban. And I think maybe the word ban is the problem.
Well, it could be. And so, where I end the piece is saying, look, we don't know exactly what works. We want to get back onto a reform footing where we are trying ideas, seeing what works and what doesn't, and then making improvements as we go along. And the one way you don't have that happen, the one mistake of the old law that I would not repeat, is to include a sunset clause. The sunset clause kills the whole thing because all you have to do if you're an opponent is just to sit on your hands. You don't have to take a recorded vote and face your constituents about it. You can just grit your teeth, close your eyes, and let it die. So as long as it is whatever they pass, however small it may end up being, whatever it can get to the Republican House, just get it locked in that you establish the principle that it is the responsibility of our government to find a way to reduce the number of gun violence deaths down to the level of other developed countries. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do that. Let's find a way.
It's going to have to be. I think it's going to have to be really tepid because I do not think Harry Reid is going to be excited about getting Democrats on the record on this to pass something through the Senate with the thought that it may not pass the House anyway. So I think...
So this brings up your previous point about the politics in the various key swing states that have long been resistant to gun control measures. What I think is a little bit unknown right now is how much does the Newtown shooting change the political calculus, how much does the changing demographics of the country change the political calculus, and how much does NRA's political misstep change the political calculus. I think it's notable that, the reason why Democrats have been very, restrained on gun control for the last 10 years is they've been following the thesis of Tom Schaller's book, Whistling Past Dixie, where he said, look, the Democrats, forget the South. You're not going to the South for a generation or more. It's God, guns, and gays down there, and you lose on all three, so forget it. However, the interior West is an area that has more potential for Democrats, and it's just guns there. The God and the gays part is not as much of a problem for that. They have more of a libertarian streak there. So if Democrats just put guns to the side, you'll be competitive, and they've followed that advice, and it has worked. They are competitive in Colorado. They are competitive in Nevada. They are competitive in New Mexico. They're getting there in Arizona. Not to mention the industrial Midwest.
And by the way, but let me just say, I think that there is a huge cultural disconnect here, and when it comes to the West, I spend a good bit of time in Arizona. I like to vacate. I like to summer in Arizona when it's about 100 million degrees and no one else is there. And this past summer, my wife and my son and I went out in an SUV with the driver and went on this desert tour. Like, miles and miles and miles from civilization in the desert. And you run into some people out there, and they may have, if they have a gun and you don't, it would be very easy for them to just take your car, and you would, of course, perish in the desert. It wouldn't take too long without water out there. And our driver had a gun, and I was really glad that he did. And so I think that there's, Gabby Giffords had a Glock, I think, and she was from Tucson, I believe. I think that
and her replacement is definitely a moderate on these issues. He's not despite being there for that event itself, he has not been a diehard gun control advocate. He's playing very careful.
So I think those of us who live in big in or around big cities, and politicians who are disconnected from that, I mean, that is a different culture, and
definitely. Yeah. But I would also note that the current governor of Colorado, John Hickenlooper, came out in support of universal background checks, which is not something that the NRA it has gotten behind. So yes, you're right that that's long been the case in these states. And the evidence of Democrats, soft shoeing the issue has helped them politically in these states. We wouldn't be in a position to have any gun control if they're just going to lose all the time. So I don't see that as some sort of egregious political move that they made. But it's possible that these combination of recent events is changing the calculus, even in some of these Western states, by evidence of what the Colorado governor just did.
Well, not to mention the fact that in Colorado you had, of course, Columbine and some other incidents. So, I mean, it may be a little bit unique in Colorado, but, of course, Arizona also.
They couldn't get gun show loophole passed. They could not get gun show loophole passed right after Columbine. This is when the ban was in effect. Right. This thing happened in Colorado, and the NRA was being very defiant in Colorado at the time. So, I mean, people, you would think Colorado would have moved farther along at that point, but they didn't.
And, of course, the Gabby Gifford shooting was in Arizona. So
sure.
That. Hey, I wanted to bring up, and again, we're at this dangerous time where we don't know what Obama's going to say, but we do know that this way or after that. But there was talk that there's going to be some sort of a holistic approach, that, there's going to be something said about the violent entertainment world, about the culture, video games, and all of that. And I don't know what you think about it, but I think it's a legitimate issue. I'm not in favor of censorship, but I do believe that that our violent TV and entertainment culture can contribute, to, especially if someone has a mental health issue, which is another part of this holistic approach. That these things could be interrelated. The fact that what happened at the Aurora shooting. That happened during the Batman movie. The guy was dressed up like the Joker. I mean, it seems more than coincidental. And that was a movie where the Joker was like the anti-hero. I mean, I'm talking about the movie the movie that preceded when the shooting happened. The Heath Ledger character was more charismatic and sort of the anti-hero. So I don't know what they're going to say or do, but I do suspect that they will at least pay lip service to that. But what do you think?
Well, I expect at least lip service. We know even less about the impact of video games than we do about the impact of gun regulation. It's a very new field. It's very hard to draw specific correlations. Maybe some studies in the future will. I don't think we have those studies yet. So it's all everyone's gut reactions to these things. You certainly, it can't hurt to try to extract some voluntary cooperation with these industries to see what they're willing to do. There's some extent that's happened with movies where you have your rating systems and you have difficulty to buy a ticket for certain movies if you're under 18, all that kind of stuff. But no one's arguing that these things fully insulate children from all violence or all things that parents don't want them to see, because the media culture is way too diffuse.
Right.
We already have a Supreme Court rule. We have Supreme Court rulings on First and Second Amendment that make it impossible to flat ban anything you don't like. We can't ban all handguns.
Right.
I would imagine we could ban all handguns. We'd probably solve this problem.
Well,
but under Heller,
speaking of handguns, I mean, Ben Shapiro. Everybody should go watch it if you haven't seen it already. Ben Shapiro has this new book, Bullies Out, and he went on Piers Morgan, and I think did a great job much better than that other guy he had on a couple days
Alex
earlier.
Jones, who's just but I find the Ben Shapiro line of argument.
But I mean, the Shapiro was basically saying more people are killed in Chicago by handguns. You know, and of course Chicago has, I think, a gun ban or some sort of very tight.
But it was struck down by the court with Heller.
So, but okay, but my point is that it's not like a 15 or 18-year-old kid going into a movie theater. It's drug deals and sort of random violence or drug hits. And so you could make an argument that, you know, more people die from that as opposed to these big incidents.
That's not an argument. That's just a statistical fact.
But yet, 99% of the attention seems to be focused on this other.
And Ben Shapiro is perfectly right to shine a light on the larger problem. Why I find Shapiro very disingenuous is he's not proposing anything to solve the larger problem. You know, if the problem is handguns, I'm not seeing anything from the right say, okay, let's find some strategy to deal with handgun violence within the bounds of the Second Amendment. I'm not seeing a lot of thoughtful critiques about that. Well, yes, you should bring up the subject, but then take the next step and actually try to solve the problem.
There was a great discussion this morning on Morning Joe about the culture thing. And I thought they made some really good points, especially Mika Brzezinski made some really good points. And the way I see it is, it strikes me that, so the Chicago thing is a different phenomenon. But the phenomenon where we have these generally young men shooting up places, it strikes me that clearly you have a situation where there's some mental health issues, tend to be on some sort of psychiatric drugs typically. I'm guessing they go to school and they get bullied and picked on and they get wedgies and that is horrifying and horrible. So there's the bullying issue. I think they come home and they watch Natural Born Killers and movies like that and play violent video games. And then they have access to guns. I think it is a holistic issue. I mean, I think it's bullying and mental health and the incredibly violent culture, all of these things leading into, and yet we have spent the vast majority of our time focused on the gun issue. And so I applaud Joe and Mika for spending a lot of time this morning on that phenomenon.
Well, I don't think anyone's disputing at this point that mental health is an issue here. I think there's probably a dispute what do you do about it. You know, the NRA proposal is let's have a national database of lunatics and lock them away. That might not be very practical or fair to the vast majority of mentally ill people who are not violent prone. So there's still questions of what you do about that fact.
Well, this may be naive, Bill, and I think it is naive. But I wish we have made it socially unacceptable in this country to be a racist, and I'm glad we have. We have made all sorts of things socially unacceptable. But it's not socially unacceptable to be Quentin Tarantino. In fact, you're rewarded, you're applauded for that. And I wish we could find a way to make it, to pressure, to shame, to make it socially unacceptable. Because I don't believe in censorship, but I want to make it socially unacceptable. People need to have a conscience about this.
Once you do that, you inherently make it cool. It's a catch-22. As soon as you try the shaming prospect, it becomes cooler in the process.
Well, I think if Matt Lewis tries to shame them, it becomes cooler. It's like when conservatives recently tried to go after Lena Dunham. It probably helps her. But guess what? If Judd Apatow took it upon himself to say, "Look, I got kids. This isn't cool," now all of a sudden things get done.
I'm skeptical it would work that easily. There's been glorification of violence before movies, before television, before radio. It is not unique to America that there is a market for violent media or violent video games.
But so much of that, Bill, maybe I'm wrong, but my impression is that we've always had violence, but it was the good guy in the white hat shooting the bad guys. And so, but the problem that I see is the sort of rise of the anti-hero. That we're not just glorifying violence, we're glorifying evil. Am I wrong about that? is this just me?
I can't say. I'm being a young father, a father of a young children. I don't see a lot of movies these days. I haven't played any video games in a very long time, so I can't tell you what exactly is out there. My sense of it is usually most of these things, there still is a good and bad part of it. The guy killing, Django Unchained, the guy doing the killing is good, right? He's trying to not be a slave anymore. He's killing slave masters, but it's very bloody and gory. So I assume that a lot of these, deluded killers think they are good in this instance. They think they are the righteous one, and they're killing the useless of society in their worldview of things. So I just don't know how easily you put that back in the box. I have no problem having commissions about it. I have no problem having studies about it. I have no problem with these industries trying to find ways to do things to police their own people. I am skeptical you're going to find a way to totally wipe it off the media blackboard, because the market for it is always going to be there, and it's even easier to create these things without having big studios behind it now. So even if the big studios said no, then independent folks would still do it. So and you can't ban outright without violating the First Amendment. So there's things we like to do under the Second Amendment. I like doing the Second Amendment that I can't do
right.
because it's in the Second Amendment. So I got to work around that somehow.
Well, and I mean, when it comes to the Second Amendment and these horrible atrocities, I would say that freedom is messy. I mean, and there are major consequences to it. And so I would equally defend the First and the Second Amendment, despite the fact that I think that there can be some very horrible consequences. And I wish people would take it upon themselves as to exercise responsibility, whether it's, look, I mean, if you're a mom and you know that your child has health issues, maybe don't take him to a firing range. I'm not sure when that happened, how old he was when it happened. Maybe don't leave guns around the house. That would seem to me to be common sense. And I wish that some of the people who dedicate their lives to making movies, and by the way, it does, TV does matter. If the things we saw on TV didn't persuade us or change our worldviews, they wouldn't sell TV ads for millions of dollars. I mean, clearly, they are, they do matter. They do impact the culture.
Well, I have to jump. I have a meeting I have to get to. I'm sorry to have an abbreviated session with you on this.
It was kind of a bummer, Bill. It's a very heavy topic today, but no way around it.
I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about it again. I don't think this is going to get resolved in a week.
All right, man. Good talking with you.
Until next week, have a good time over in Southern DMZ.
That's right, and read Bill's piece at the New Republic. Peace.
Take care.